What's up, everybody? In this video, we're going to look at a part of a Requiem setting that I'm working on. This is probably the largest work I've started on. I'm at the point of recording the video about halfway through the whole of the Requiem, but we're going to look at the first bit today. We're going to look at the Introit, the Kyrie, and the Requiem Aeterna, which I kind of think about these three sections as being one large section that's a bit of a ternary form. The Introit being the A section, the Kyrie being the large B section, and the Requiem Aeterna being a return to the A section. We're going to look at an AI demo that I created of this piece. One of the things I found making this is that the AI model does a lot better with the Latin diction than it does with English, which was kind of surprising, I guess, a pleasant surprise, if you will. So we've got quite a large score to look at. The instrumentation for this piece is for SATB choir, organ, and string orchestra. We'll have a listen to each of the sections individually and go through the score to talk about some of the things that are going on. We'll dive right into the Introit here. I hope you enjoy the piece and learn something from this discussion.
Requiem Aeternam,
Requiem Aeternam,
dona eis Domine,
dona eis Domine,
et lux
lux perpetus Luceat, Luceat, Luceat eis. Et tibi redetur, votum in Jerusalem, exaudi, 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 orationem meam a te omnes caro veniet.
All right, we're going to start off this Introit here with an instrumental introduction. A lot of the melodic material in this section is borrowed from later on. I wrote this intro after I set the text. That's always a really good thing to do because the text is going to be the thing that drives the melody. And especially in a long work like this where you want ideas to hang together, it's good to write the instrumental only parts after you've set the text. Over the page here, we continue on with that introduction. Well, on the third page here, the choir comes in. We're in 8 parts. We have the men in 4 parts, and then we have the women in 4 parts. They're doing this chant like, really borrowing from like Anglican chant in this section, and they're imitating each other. So over the page here on this Dona eis Domine, the final statement, the sopranos and the altos introduce this consecutive 7th chord figure here that's going to be imitated first in the organ and then in the strings parts, and the strings are going to run with it a bit. Then we've got this Et Lux Perpetua bit. This is the main theme, if you will, of this section. When I mentioned a second ago about writing choral parts, setting the text that are going to be used in the instrumental bits, this is the bit I was talking about, that dee 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 dee. That's coming in the choral parts now, and it's having a bit of an imitative entry, which we're kind of building up to this point in a way of having imitative entries of this musical idea in the instrumental parts. Now we're having it in quicker succession in the choral parts with the text that it was set to. So I really came up with this melodic idea when I was setting this text, took that idea, and then ran back with it. Over the page here, we have this Luceat eis. Right, so we have this Luceat idea. It happens in the choral parts, then it gets imitated in the strings parts. We do it as a bit of a harmonic sequence where it happens again, and then it happens again down in the strings parts. And then so we have Luceat, Luceat, Luceat eis. Right, so on the third one is when we get the eis, and the sort of more satisfying ending of the phrase is realized. After that choral phrase ends, we've got a bit of an instrumental interlude, which brings us to the end of our kind of A section, right? This is the end of the first bit of this introit here. Te decet hymnus section. It's going to be softer. It's going to be nicer, right? This first section. Our A section, if you will, was quite serious. This is going to be a bit lighter, a bit more of a let. The AI does a decent job of capturing the accuracy, right? I'd say it does an accurate job, but in real life, if a choir was doing it, this section would be much more musical, much more lyrical, with a lilt, that the AI can't really get, right? Because it's a computer. But nonetheless, our sopranos come in with that main theme, our first half of the phrase, if you will. The whole choir will come in for Deus as our kind of like second half of the phrase. Then when we go to repeat this section, the altos are going to have that main tune, right? And then instead of repeating Deus, we have a bit of a hemiola on Deus in Sion. And then we just repeat the whole thing again, but it's going to be harmonized. Right? We're in a different key, we're in a brighter key, but we're going to be in 4 parts in that choral bit. We have a fairly substantial cadence here at the second Deus in Sion, and then after that, we're kind of, if you think of this whole introit as a ternary form, right? The first section, our A section, was darker, then we have the lighter B section. We're coming back to our darker A section with exactly the same instrumental interlude that we started off with. Instead of an introduction, it's an interlude this time. This section would be difficult to harmonically analyze. It's almost post-tonal, which is usually out of the scope of what I do, especially down here. Not usually my style, but it suited the text and the darkness and the kind of mystery and confusion that we wanted to get, which I think opens up the interesting discussion about. At university, I really found that people tried to hit home the ideas of only doing post-tonal harmony, and my attitude is, if it suits the text, it suits the text. And in this case, I felt like it did and created the effect that we wanted, so we ran with it. Then after that at TB Redetor, we have this sort of, chant-like thing that follows it up. Votum in Jerusalem, the chant-like bit. then we're really coming to some new material, something that we haven't seen at all yet. This exaudi, right? Hear us, as in like hear our prayer. So for painting this text, right? Henry Purcell style of doing things. That exaudi, really, if I were rehearsing this from a conductor's perspective, I'd be really telling them that this X is a pickup, the ow is, the strong beat, and then a feminine ending on the D. On the D syllable there. So I think the AI did an all right job of it, but I've marked that in the score decently well. So, any conductor who's worth his salt would know that this is how we want to do it. And then we're doing it almost as a sequence, right? This idea, this exaudi, hear me. And a lot of these sort of ideas that we're talking about with text painting are going to be replicated in the strings, right? So the strings are really kind of imitating the vibe, for lack of a better way of putting it, that we're trying to create. And then at the end of that string sort of interlude down here that we have, after the second exaudi, we're going to have a large crescendo, building back up into that forte, into that fortissimo, and the organ's going to play a big role in that, right? The organ's going to really, that great big chord is going to be something that cuts through in a major way, and we're going to do the same sort of musical idea again, but this time we're going to run forward into something different. We have this exaudi, and then the harmonies get a little bit less traditional again. And we end off with this orationem meam te omnes caro veniet. This section is going to all be coming back, right? So you can think of this whole introit that we've talked about as the A section in a much larger ternary form.
Kyrie
So if we're thinking of these first three movements of this Requiem as being a large ternary form, the Introit was our A section, the Kyrie is going to be our B section. Right, so we have a different musical idea. It's softer. We've come down. We've had this great big exaudi just before this in the in the Introit. Now we're going to do something different. We're still in 3. The Kyrie, I always think of the Kyrie is a really interesting text when it comes to 3s, because the text can really be felt in 3, and Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison, it screams ternary form, right? So our B section, if you will, our Kyrie, is also going to be a ternary form. We're going to have that first Kyrie eleison, and that's going to repeat a few times. Then we're going to have Christe eleison, and that's going to repeat a few times, and we're going to have Kyrie eleison again, bringing back a lot of those same musical ideas to be a return of a small A section, if you will. So we're going to start off with this kind of, more contrapuntal texture happening in the strings. We have this, descending chromatic scale. When I was thinking about the mood or the vibe of this Introit and Kyrie, there are some intense moments, but, I think that only going for darkness across a Requiem is kind of vanilla. I wanted to also have a bit of sorrow in this, and nothing says that, I think, quite like a descending chromatic bass, like a ground bass. I'm like thinking back to writing this. I really think of the ground bass in Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas, right? There are very few things in music that sound sadder than that, and we're gonna do something similar here, but more chromatic harmonies and contrapuntal things going on than what would have been front of mind in the late 1600s. After that strings introduction, we're going to have a more contrapuntal texture in the choral parts. And the choral parts are really borrowing, almost doubling what's going on in the strings parts. So that does a few things. It's going to make it easier for them to come in with their entries, if they're, remotely on the ball at all. Going back here, if they've heard, okay, well, the violin has just sung the thing that the sopranos are going to sing, it's going to make it easier for them to come in. It's also, I think, good to repeat sections this way in a large work. Right? I think it's really easy. I've spent a decent amount of time talking about structure in this. I think in a large work, if you're not really intentional about the structure and what's getting repeated and where and why things are happening, it can just run away. It can be a runaway train, if you will. And it's really easy for a large piece like this to not hang together. So I think repeating this section or foreshadowing it in the orchestra is a good way to create unity. Right? So we've got this, the still same sort of chromatic descending bass. The harmonies are actually almost exactly the same in this section as they were in the orchestral introduction. Right? They're contrapuntal, and they all come to a fairly significant cadence here on the last Kyrie eleison. We're going to have a strings interlude that kind of brings things down. I think this section is a bit classical, but I think it works, and it leads into an almost chant-like section for the Christe, right? So if we're thinking about this Kyrie as being a ternary form, the Kyrie eleison was our A section. We're now on to Christe eleison, which is our B section. And we've got this interesting thing going on where we have, this just descending scalar pattern happening in each of the parts, but it's handing it off to the other ones, right? So the soprano hands it off to the alto, hands it off to the tenor, hands it off to the bass, and then we do it again. And as this is going on, there are some, some fairly interesting, unconventional harmonies going on underneath. Right? So this is something that, other than a few intervals, where we have these sort of key changes, which, you could, definitely rehearse around. This is actually a fairly easy melody to follow with some quite interesting harmonies going on underneath. What this section does, this sort of chant-like where we're handing it off to each other, it creates I think a pretty effective contrast from what we had going on in the A section, where it was much more contrapuntal than this. Right? And then, we're talking about a ternary form, right? So we've come to the end of our B section. We're going to hear another A section, and that is exactly what we'd expect to hear in a Kyrie, right? So we're back to our second go, if you will, of Kyrie eleison. And, we're going to lead in with exactly the same strings introduction as we had before, right? We're tying things together, bringing back musical ideas. I really want to stress that in large works like this, right? Like this is a 9-minute long piece. These 3 sections together are about 9 minutes long, and that's only one section of a much larger work, right? So like finding ways to get things to tie together is really important, and repeating sections like this is a great way to do that. Right? Then we're going to come back here again. The Kyrie is going to be exactly the same as it was. Right? This is actually like a carbon copy. Like I clicked copy and paste in Sibelius to do this section. So over the page here, we've got a decently significant cadence, but instead of having it really be final, we're going to have that bum, bum, kind of, almost like, I really think of this section as kind of sounding like Haydn or Mozart, which is a little more classical, I would say, than what I would normally write. But I think it works and it's interesting. It creates a good contrast to what we had before.
Requiem Aeternam,
Requiem Aeternam,
dona eis Domine,
dona eis Domine,
et lux
Lux
perpetua,
Luceat, Luceat, Luceatis.
All right, so those are the first 3 sections of the Requiem that I'm currently working on. I'm thinking I'm going to do this as a bit of a series where there will be a part 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 or 6, talking about the other sections of this Requiem, because there's way too much music to unpack in one video here. So I've already started on the second video that should be coming out later this week, where we're going to be talking a lot more about vocal fugues. The Kyrie section in particular in this is fairly light compared to other Kyries I've listened to. But the next sections that we're going to listen to, we've got the Dies Irae coming up, so it's going to get dark and it's going to get dramatic. So definitely stay tuned for those. If you learned something from these discussions, definitely hit that like and subscribe button to not miss any more of these AI demos and discussions about my composition work.